Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk About It with Taylor Nolan. I am your host, and today is going to be kind of a little bit of a piggyback episode off of our last episode with Ken, and really excited to kind of get into this episode today because we're going to talk with Josh, and he's the co-author of Struggle Well with Ken and is also the executive director of their institute, Boulder Crest. So again, kind of a little bit of some of the post-traumatic growth work with different veterans and different kinds of trauma experiences. But Josh has a very different kind of background where he was not at all really related to the military life growing up. And I think has a story that many people will be able to relate to. So without any further ado, so hi, Josh. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Taylor. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really excited to get into this conversation with you as it's a little bit of like the flip side kind of what I spoke about with Ken in our last episode. You kind of have a little bit of a different background, but are involved in some of the same work. So I'd love to kind of like start off this conversation, just getting a little bit more of your background. I mean, in our initial call, absolutely loved how you kind of started telling me a little bit of your story, how, you know, you were very opposite in the sense that you had no military upbringing. So would love to hear you kind of walk us through your story a little bit of how you kind of got connected with Ken.
Absolutely. So I tell people I grew up as what I call an indoor Jew in Dallas, Texas. And that means I was somebody who was raised to use my mind and not my hands, right? I'm not handy with things. I don't sleep outside. I don't go camping. My job was to be smart and get a profession and make the family proud. Yeah. And I did a good job of that. And I went to school, to college and graduated in 2001 and then subsequently worked for big companies for the next 10 years, 10 or 11 years around the world. And I had, aspects of my life were great, and I was married and I had money and traveled, first class and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
and
living the life.
I really came to a point in living the life. And it was really a life of like money, power, and respect. It was like, it's kind of a rap song come alive. And so there was facets of it that seemed to provide some level of validation and fulfillment.
Yeah, it's like
there
it's
was
that
other parts
life
that were under the surface.
It's like that life that like everyone thinks that you should have, kind of.
Yes, and Joseph Campbell talks about how you have these crises in life when you climb to the top of a ladder and realize it's against the wrong building, and that's what happened. And so in about 2010, 2011, I started to really reflect after my wife at the time had asked me, is this what you want to do with the rest of your life? And she meant my work, and I really took that question to heart, and I began to examine my life. And what I concluded was that the life I had constructed was a life that I had no resonance with. And that in a lot of respects, the best analogy for me is the Truman Show, which is it felt like somebody else had built a life, given it to me and said, have fun. And I wasn't having fun. And it was a lot of respects. It was brutal. I was totally numbed out. I wasn't surrounded by the kind of quality people that I would want to be surrounded with. And it really led me to a place where I had to make some hard choices. And I did. And so I got divorced. I switched careers. I switched friends. And I started to try to build a life from scratch that would allow me to feel like it was a reflection of what was inside, that what was happening outside. And letting go of all of that stuff, those false things, was liberating. And at the same time, it was the most destabilizing and scariest thing I've ever experienced in my life, which ties back to being an indoor Jew, right, who was not trained to pursue adversity, who was not trained to be strong. I was trained to be smart. And all of a sudden, I had given away everything that gave me value. And so I was sitting there in the world really feeling exposed, feeling totally vulnerable in a place where I didn't have language to express how I was feeling. I didn't have people I could talk to about it. And I was in a bad place. And a bad place meaning severe panic attacks, incredible insomnia, having to drink too much to try to sleep or calm down, suicidal at times, just in a really, really bad way. And in the midst of that struggle, which went on for months and months, and I was a high-functioning person, and I think that's one of the things, that I see in my civilian brethren is we can really fake it, right? We can really put on that mask and go do what has to be done and at the end of the day, come home, not be able to sleep and drink too much and all the other things that no one else sees because you keep it behind closed doors. And I was a master at that. And so I realized, and so I was working for a guy at the time whose son had died about my age, in my early 30s at the time. And he gave me a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which was by Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist who spent 3 years in the concentration camps. And I read it, and it occurred to me that maybe I should start to focus on someone besides myself in my life, and maybe I should try to be helpful to somebody else and serve someone, serve something. And a week later, I was introduced to a couple who had lost, she had lost her brother in Afghanistan. He was a Marine. And they asked if I would help them with some veteran stuff. I said, I don't know anything about this world, but I'm happy to. And I started reading about a lot of the issues that veterans were facing, and in particular, PTSD and suicide. And if I'm being honest, I would read suicide notes, and I was like, I could have written that. I understood what that person was talking about. And so that led me down the path of how can I use aspects of my experience to help other people. And so I got involved with a couple of different groups, and I found myself standing face to face in 2013 with a 6'2", 250-pound former Army powerlifting champion who had jumped into Panama, named Dusty Baxley. And Dusty and I talked for a while, and he said, you seem like a good kid. You seem like you're well-meaning. You want to help. He said, but you're going to do one thing first. And I said, what's that? And he leaned into my face. It's like, nose to nose. And he said, nicely, I'll say the polite term. He said, you're going to fix yourself. And you're not going to help anybody else until you help yourself. And I spent the next week with a group of veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. And I got to see that even on their worst day, they were the finest people I'd ever met. They gave me strength when I didn't have it. They gave me the courage. They helped me see what I was capable of doing. And for the last 5 years, in large part because of that, I've translated and transformed my life into a life of growth and strength and purpose, and with a particular focus on veterans, because personally for me, they are the men and the women who helped me when I didn't, well, for no reason, right? There was no reason for them to help me. So that's how I got kind of mixed up in a world where I went from not knowing any military or veterans to now I spend the vast majority of my time with them.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, thank you for sharing all of that. There's so many parts of that that I find fascinating that I would love to explore a little bit more. Going back kind of to the beginning of this, where you feel like you're living this like false life. I think so many people struggle with that and find themselves living a life that they think it's what they should do. It's what they should have. It's what should equate to happiness for them. And oftentimes that's really not the case. You kind of have to find your own happiness. And it sounds like for you, you knew that you had to kind of make these really big life decisions and change kind of your whole and entire life from work to family. And those are like extremely significant changes to make. Changing, literally every piece of your everyday life. It makes total sense that you would experience that really high anxiety and even some of those suicidal thoughts as you're like changing literally the core of like kind of who you are and who you thought you were supposed to be. That's like a really hard time to go through. And I'm really glad that you were able to then find, this community and this connection within this community of veterans. And I'm curious for you during that time, if before, getting connected with this community of people, if therapy was ever something that you sought out, or if you had found other people to talk to and, open up about some of this intense anxiety you were experiencing and even these suicidal thoughts.
So my journey's interesting. My father's a physician and he's a male health advocate, and he's been that way for a long, long time. And so I've always been kind of in and around doctors, and I didn't sleep. So if we go back in the story, like when I was in college, my junior year, my mom got diagnosed with stage 4B lymphoma and was told she had 2 years to live. My grandfather is my favorite person on earth, died of heart failure. And so that was when I started not sleeping. And for 10 years, I slept an hour a night, and I never told anybody. I didn't tell the doctor, not because I was hiding it, but because for some reason I normalized it.
Yeah.
And so it was amazing. So you'd be like, oh, how'd you sleep last night? I was like, terrible. Right. And, I would tell like friends, but it didn't add up. It was like a series of one night of bad sleep as opposed to a trend. And so that was one part of the interesting part of the struggle. Was I was smart enough to know better, but for some reason I sort of deluded myself to thinking I was all right.
I think that's so normal, though. Like, to know better, but then to just make it your own normal and like to silence all of that. Like, you don't really share it with other people. Like, you might be like, "Oh yeah, I had terrible sleep," but that's just kind of something that people just say sometimes, and people get used to it. And it's like, "Oh yeah, you usually don't get good sleep," but they don't really actually know the extent of it. And to you, not fully opening up about it is a way to kind of like protect that.
It is. And when you look, I was talking to my father about this over Thanksgiving, and I was like, Dad, I went to some really good doctors, and I went to one for a bunch of stomach issues. I went to another for a bunch of sleep issues when I finally dealt with it. And I was like, and at no point was anyone like, "Hey, like, are you okay?" Because we don't see anything wrong with you on like any images or tests, but something's going on because obviously, this is not phantom. Yeah. And it's interesting, and when I think and you look at some of the conditions that exist, but sleep issues and stomach issues and GI issues, generally there's that track back to stress, to anxiety, to basically a system that's not functioning the way it's supposed to. And so when I started struggling, and what was great for me was, so my best friend in the world is an English guy who I went to college with, and I called him and I was like, "Hey, I don't think I'm doing okay." And he said, "Well, why don't you call my brother-in-law, who is a child psychologist?" And so I called Seb, and we had some amazing conversations, and he spoke some hard truths. He obviously wasn't my therapist because it's not the relationship we had, but he was probably one of the most instrumental people in the outset who helped frame what was likely to happen with my marriage, who helped frame what was likely to take place. And he said to me, he goes, "Your friends will be there for some period of time." He's like, "But you should probably go get a professional because at some point your friends are going to get tired of listening to you." And so I asked around, and it's not like, people don't brag about their therapist that often. So it's not the easiest thing to figure out who to go to. And I went to one gentleman, and I went 4 times, and it was extravagantly expensive, no insurance. And he was just, I was at a point where I was in a fragile state. And he was cruel. He was mean. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't keep going back because it was like, I can't go back for more lashings. Yeah. And then I went to another person, a woman who I went to, and her method was more of kind of like a wall or a mirror. And she didn't say much. And and in a lot of respects, I found that very frustrating. The good news was, as even in the worst case, I found myself once to twice a week, I had an appointment with myself. And throughout the week, I would write down things that came up. And I would sit in that room and I would talk about them. And in some respects, I think one of the reasons why I switched careers, I'm doing what I'm doing now with mental health, is because I think I had to figure out a lot of stuff on my own. But that venue provided me with a space to do it. And then I started to find my way. And this is really where I think the veteran and military community, they get a knock for not wanting to talk about stuff and not wanting to be, the term is vulnerable. It's not my favorite word, but it's a term that people use. And that's not what I found. I found in these men and women a capacity and willingness to have deep and profound conversations about life. Yeah. So that when you say "Hey, I really was struggling with, thoughts of suicide," and you'd be like, "Oh yeah, me too." And you talk about it. And there was nothing abnormal about any of the conversation. And so it was an interesting insight into a group of people who had dealt with things that most people don't deal with, especially death, and who had a capacity to do it. So I found a bit of a mix in different people. And what I also found was when I was willing to open up about both my struggle and my strength and my growth, that people I knew were a lot deeper than I would have ever given them credit for. Yeah. I unlocked a doorway to parts of their life that they wouldn't normally share with people.
No, that's so true. So I just want to take a quick little break to remind you listeners about a guest that I had on the podcast a few episodes ago, talking about self-confidence. And that was with Daisy, who started the Banish Company. And the company I'm really, really excited to partner with because they're not into all the marketing schemes. And it's just a really authentic brand. And her story is very, very relatable and takes a lot of courage to own using your stuff like that, you know, and to go out there and like create a product that's going to work for you when you've tried so many products and nothing's worked. And so she has the Banisher kit, which has a Banisher and then also the Banish oil. And so it really helps to like actually repair your skin, help your skin repair itself. And then the vitamin C serum is in the Banish oil, and it's like completely natural, like no artificial dyes or colorings or fragrances or artificial preservatives. One of my favorite things about the Banish products is that they're actually made fresh to order, which is like very personalized. And then you have a 30-day money-back guarantee policy. And I've absolutely loved using their products, their vitamin C serum, and they have like a activated charcoal mask that I love using too. They're just really, really great. And I just want to give another little reminder to you guys to check them out. You can check out all their different products at banish.com. So don't forget to take a little mental note to head on over to banish.com and check out their products. But we can get back on track with the show now. I appreciate you opening up about your experiences in therapy. I think it's always so interesting for me to hear other people's experiences to kind of reflect on my own as a client, not as a professional. And you know, it can be really hard to like find that person that like really actually meshes with you. And it sounds like you kind of had some of the skills and tools already to kind of like process things on your own, and then were able to find a community to share that with that felt maybe more authentic and more connecting and fulfilling for you than the therapist that you were able to find. But yeah, like their approach can make such a difference. Like if you're not in that place where you're like, I'm ready to be challenged, I'm ready to like, you know, really get to work on it. Like if that's not like your kind of style and that's your therapist style, like totally going to clash there. And I'm curious, you said that you don't really like the word vulnerable, and I use that word so much, and I'm really curious for you, like what other word you'd like to use, or what your thought is around that word, because it's one that we use on the pod a lot. So would love to hear where you're at with that.
And I know, because I was listening to some of the past podcasts and I heard it. And I know it's a common word, and I love Brene Brown to death.
Yeah.
He's amazing. So I think the reason why I would say that, and I was thinking about this because I have a bit of a visceral reaction to it. Mm-hmm. And not a big one, but a bit of one. And in part, you know, I work around these warriors, right? These are like hardy men and women who've been to war. They've done things that I can't fathom doing and still wouldn't do. And so vulnerability, I think, both in a physical terms, is not something that I would ever use with them. And interestingly, when we talk about being people of integrity, about being authentic and being honest, mm-hmm. Those words are essentially the synonyms for vulnerable to me. And mm-hmm. so like when we say, you know, and talk about the need to, for example, like as a military metaphor, empty your rucksack. So they carry these giant rucksacks. You know, you see the example of a military person carrying this heavy backpack. And the idea is we carry a lot of stuff around with us in our lives that we don't talk about and we don't think about, that impacts our ability to engage today. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, like, we need to look at that. We need to talk about that stuff. And so we don't but it's interesting because that word to me can be a like almost a detriment, or it can be something that actually disincentivizes men, I think in particular, mm-hmm. from being willing to have hard conversations. Where if we just talk about shame, we talk about guilt, and we talk about the importance of being honest. And you know, one of our favorite stories is at the Hanoi Hilton, these prisoners of war who had all been tortured and all gave it up, right? They violated the code of conduct, and they wouldn't talk to each other because they were ashamed of what they had done, but they had all done the same thing. And I think so much in life is what that life is about. I mean, we all do things that we're not proud of, mm-hmm. and we use those as reasons why we won't connect, engage, and be authentic with other people. Yeah. And it's almost this cosmic joke of like we're all in our own cells. We're trapped mm-hmm. in our own cells of our own making. And so I think the vulnerability, and you using the term, I don't have any issue with you using it, mm-hmm. and I appreciate that term. I think for me, because I think language is so important, I don't find it like when someone says that to me, I don't get the same reaction where I'd be like, hey, I want to live an authentic and honest and open existence where I'm willing to go anywhere and have a conversation about my life with anybody. And I'll do that. I'm happy to do that. But like, if someone was like, oh, thanks for being vulnerable, I'll be like, oh, it just feels different to me. I can't, it just, that just is what it is. I guess we're all a little bit different.
See, I would wonder, in your first, as you first started talking about it, you're like, well, because we're like working with these like warriors, and like they're like so strong and like they've been through this stuff, and I'm wondering then if part of the word of vulnerable and the act of being vulnerable still has this association with like not being strong and of being like especially like for men of being this like scary but like warm and cozy and like women feminine-y thing that happens that where it doesn't feel appropriate to use in that kind of setting maybe where I will say I think it's good to recognize where language is important and where people can be extra sensitive to that, and I think given your population and using those words authentic and talking about shame and stuff is super great. And I can see where people might respond to that differently than they would vulnerable. But it's always so just curious to me how like why someone would respond that way,
Taylor, it feels like, I guess the best way I would think about it, it's like, it feels like if you're vulnerable, I can't even say it now, then you're compromised, right? That you're exposed in some adverse way that has the potential to cause you harm.
And that is so true. I mean, that's exactly what it is.
But my view is that being willing to be open and authentic, and James Stockdale was this amazing guy, spent I think Stockdale 7.5 years in the Hanoi Hilton as a prisoner of war. Just an amazing man. And he talks about being able to live your life with an integrity that you can never be extorted or blackmailed for any actions you've engaged. And it's like that sort of life that I think about is actually like letting your secrets go, is letting go of what you hold on to, of the things you've done you're not proud of. And it may not be telling everybody everything all the time, but having a group of people you can do is in fact an act of strength. And it doesn't actually open people up to hurt you. It opens you up to be able to confront the manners in which you're imperfect. And whatever, Brene Brown's book, right, The Gifts of Imperfection, I think speaks to that. And so that's, to me, when I look at that language, I'm like, I don't believe that when I stand up in front of people and talk about, some of the things I might have done or some of the ways I acted or my life that I created that was false, like, I don't feel like I'm exposed to anything. I feel like I'm actually on top of it and I'm stronger for it. And so I think that's the interesting part. But I agree with you. And then there's some beautiful discussions, and I've been having them this week, about toxic masculinity, about talking to kids and young men and those sorts of things. And I think that the challenge is getting the language right is important, because these issues are so sensitive and it goes to the point about the therapist, which is we are so, like, if we treated dates the way we did therapists, we would be in big trouble, right? We'd go on 2 days. We'd be like, those were terrible. I'm never dating again. I'm going to go get a cat and sit in my apartment on my own. And that's what we would do. But with a therapist, we go to like 2 and we're like, oh, they all suck. And we I'm not going. And so, and in part because, like you said, we don't know what to look for. So we don't know, you go into somebody and you're like, well, I don't understand that they're therapist styles, right? I don't know. This lady's just sitting there. She's not doing anything. I'm like, I kind of want her to do something, but I don't know what.
Yeah.
And so, and that's the interesting part to me is like, so anything we can do to smooth out that path that allows people to access it. And in our experience, the power of the peer, the power of people who have been there and done it, who are willing to disclose before they ask you to do hard things, goes a long way. And I think if you believe what we believe, which is that the military community is distinct and in some ways has, deals with trauma at a level that most of us can't contemplate, then if we can do things that work in that community, they ought to work for the rest of our community and the rest of our country, the rest of our globe, our communities. So that's kind of the thesis or the hypothesis of our institute is, well, hey, if it works with a community that's very, very difficult to engage with, that's not that prone to have these discussions and so on and so forth, then maybe there's stuff we can translate back into the regular community and say, hey, this is what we're learning about what seems to address these issues of people not being willing to go get help, people not being willing to engage when they do get help and not being kind of an active participant, people dropping out of treatment, and so on and so forth. And that's, I think, where we see these challenges is like, this community, I mean, the military community is crazy. It's 50% won't go to the mental health folks, which is the same in the general population. 80% drop out of treatment before they complete it, and only 30% have meaningful benefits from treatment. And so it's not a good story. It's 3% of everyone in need who gets help. And so when you look at that, you're like, you've got to figure out some ways to innovate and create a different model. And in part, we do that. And what you do and have these conversations is part of that, which is breaking down these barriers that you have to go into an office that's private to have these conversations. It's like, no, we can do this in public. And it's important to do this in public because this is part of being human. This is what this is all about, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, and I'm glad you make that point because it reminded me earlier this week, I went back to my therapist. She was on maternity leave and was sharing with a friend. I was like, oh, yeah, just actually was getting off the phone with someone else. I was just like processing what I talked about in therapy. And then they were like, oh, well, do you want to talk about it? Or if you've already processed it with someone else, we don't have to talk about it. And I was like, well, no, what I talk about in there is private, but I also like to then share it with other people so that they better understand what I'm working on in my life and, what's going on with me. And then I also get a different perspective and get, a deepening of connection with each other person that I talk to about it. So it's just an interesting thought that what we talk about in therapy is this private thing, but it doesn't have to be. We can also then share and I'm going to say be vulnerable and open up ourselves to being seen by the other people in our lives. And absolutely to Brene Brown's point of you don't just do that with, everyone willy-nilly, but that, maybe finding people that have really earned the right to hear your story and that you can trust with your heart is a good place to start. And it sounds like, talked a little bit with Ken about this in your program and how you guys do the peer support and how important that is, but of developing that community. And I swear it's every episode, this is I cannot drill this point in anymore of how important social support is and how important having that community is. And it can be a scary step to open yourself up and say, this is what I'm dealing with. This is what I've seen. This is what I've experienced. And I'm hurting in this way. But like you said, you can be surprised sometimes by how people will react and that you might realize, oh, wow, this person was a lot deeper and I can actually have a much deeper connection with this person than I would have given our relationship credit for. And I think that's the really beautiful thing about the risk that we take in opening ourselves up.
It is. And I think it's, a couple of thoughts that I have. And one is, I'm obviously very outspoken about my own struggle and I'm totally fine with that. And it just as an example, so my brother lives in New York City and we do these steak nights from time to time. So I'll go up and see my niece and nephew and we'll go to dinner with his friends. And after dinner, I'll be like, hey, your friends, it's they're not doing that great. And he's like, well, no, they're doing great. And I'm like, well, yeah, maybe you think that. But when he goes to the bathroom, they all reach over to me and start asking me questions about struggling with their marriage, about not really liking what they're doing for a living. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, it's something interesting. I have some mark on my forehead that says I'm somebody, and I'm good with it, right? It's I'm the one who's willing to talk about the stuff that people don't want to talk about. And because of that, people feel comfortable coming to me because whether it's just because they're like, well, I'm not as bad as he was, which I'm totally good with. I don't care what their motive is. It's the recognition that our stories have incredible power, not just to let them go. Like Maya Angelou talks about, there's, this pain and agony of having an untold story within you, but recognizing that story holds a key to somebody else to unlock a part of themselves that they don't have access to or that they need to be able to let go of is really important. And the other part, what you said really reminds me of is I was having this conversation just in passing. I think it was last Christmas or something. And I was telling someone my story and they said, this is amazing because so many people have existential crises and then turn around and go back to the life that they were struggling with. And it's they don't get all the way across the bridge and they end up going back. And I think about this idea that it takes a hell of a lot of courage to be willing to navigate your own depths. And that gets into emotional intelligence. It also gets into being willing to ask hard questions and look at yourself honestly. And the poet Yeats, this is interesting in the context of the military folks, Yeats said that it takes more courage to explore the dark corners of one's own soul than it does to be a soldier on the battlefield.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful statement, and it's a reminder that it's really hard, and it's why it's so important to have people, like you said, who can help you. Mm-hmm. And I do think when I have people, and this is kind of the general story, someone's like, I'm not happy in my job, I'm not happy in my relationship, and what I did, which is essentially like rip the tablecloth off the table and hope that the dishes didn't break and they all broke, mm-hmm. Which I'm not sure I recommend, but it's really hard to find the people that, like, if you believe what we believe, that you're the average of the 3 to 5 people you spend the most time with, it's hard to find good people. And so you can find them in like Al-Anon groups and in 12-step groups sometimes. You might be able to find them at a spin class or a yoga class, and people who are trying to be healthier in mind and body. But as a general statement, that's what people report to me is really hard to find. And it's hard to find the social support that's supportive versus the social support that's like, hey, let's go get some drinks, right? Let's go, and that's the hard part is, where do those people hang out? And I'm lucky because I hang around with people who insist upon you being a principled person and being an honest person. And that is the joy and the blessing of military experience that they bring that we don't often think about, is that they are in a culture, in a world where they have to accept people from all different backgrounds without judging them. Mm-hmm. And that's what I wish for everybody. But there's no good answer as, where do you find these people? I don't know. You just have to go try things you weren't trying before, because mm-hmm. you'll stumble onto people you haven't stumbled upon, and you'll make mistakes, and you'll meet, you'll repeat some of the tests you have, but it is, that social support is so important, mm-hmm. and it's also really challenging. And so I don't have great guidance except try out places where people seem to be trying to be a better version of themselves.
Yeah, and I think like the weird thing about that is that I think we all have that in us, but we're all kind of doing that thing that you spoke about at the beginning of the episode where, we know what the right thing is to do, but we're just kind of normalizing these other like maladaptive behaviors to help make us feel a little bit more comfortable, to maybe numb or distract ourselves from the pain or the struggles that we're experiencing. But really, I think like we all have the capacity to be that kind of a person. We just don't have all the doors open yet to talk about it,
I completely agree that this is all, and it's what like all of philosophy is written about, and a lot of religion is all about it. And it's all about this deep internal connection and this recognition of what life's really about, and about connecting with other people at this deep level. And I've experienced that. And I think that I'm a great example of somebody who, and everyone's like, well, how could you possibly, you're an indoor Jew. How could you go hang out with these military people? And you don't have the bona fides and all these things. And it's like, all you have to be is genuine.
Yeah.
If you are genuine and you are honest, you can connect with anybody, or most people. And there are people who won't be ready, but you might serve as some kind of a role model or an example for those. So I totally agree with you that it's easy to look past the people in our lives who are, like we said earlier, are much deeper than we would give them credit for if we had the opportunity to see that part of them.
Yeah. Okay. So before we continue, I just remembered that I actually just got a new shipment of packages in yesterday, and want to remind listeners, if you don't remember last episode, I shared one of our exciting new partners, Fabletics by Kate Hudson, and actually just got my shipment in yesterday. And let me point out that the delivery time was super quick, and I'm actually obsessed with these Milla pocket leggings. They are super stretchy, lightweight, durable, comfortable. There's a little pocket in it, like where I can just like stick my phone, because I got to listen to music when I'm like working out or just, doing errands, but looking stylish. I can honestly basically live in these leggings all day. They're that comfortable. And if you've never tried Fabletics, I highly recommend starting at their collections page so you can see all the trendy pieces. You take a 60-second little style quiz, and it basically personalizes a bunch of items for you. And then extra exciting, you guys can get 2 leggings for only $24, and that's at a $99 value. So make sure you guys go to fabletics.com/Taylor. And then when you sign up for the VIP perks, you can actually get 50% off regular prices with free shipping and additional perks. But make sure that once you take that quiz that you also enter in your email address, because then you are actually able to get special exclusive monthly discounts and the inside scoop about all kinds of fun collections that haven't actually been dropped yet. So make sure that you guys go to fabletics.com/Taylor to take advantage of this deal now. You can get 2 leggings for only $24. It's trendy, it's affordable, it's super freaking cute. So make sure that you guys check out fabletics.com/Taylor. And now we can get back to the show. I'm curious for you, being someone that other people feel comfortable like sharing their story with and just kind of coming right out with that, like you spoke about at your brother's. Would you say that you were that same kind of person before you had this whole like existential crisis? Did you have any of those kinds of interactions with people before? Like, did people seek you out for that kind of stuff, or you had that kind of presence or energy like in you before?
To an extent. My mom's a really amazing lady. She's had cancer for 25 years, stage 4B, and she's still alive, which is some kind of miracle. Mm-hmm. And she's always been that way, always been a person. And I take a lot after my mom. I have a lot of her amazing qualities. So to an extent I did. But what I would admit is, although that's true, and I had natural empathy, it's also true that I wasn't listening to those people the way I now understand you ought to, and people deserve to be listened to. I was listening from my head and giving advice and the rest of it, as opposed to listening deeply from my heart and my soul in a way in which just listening is the thing in a lot of instances, right? It is the mechanism to connect. You don't have to solve people's problems. You just have to be able to be there with them and have that space. And so I'd say to an extent, it's not a complete kind of creation of like the second, like 2.0 me, but I tend to think in life, we will always find these through lines in our lives. And so even though, they tell me I'm getting my karma right, because I worked in big tobacco and big oil before. Okay. So that's what I did. And people, they can't see it, but there's a lot of things that I learned doing those jobs that are directly applicable to the work I do now. And there's a lot of instances that you don't think about as important back when you're doing them that tend to be the major parts or the building blocks of the life that you really want to live. And so that was, I think, that's the encouraging part is, yes, I gave away, deconstructed my entire life and moved to a totally different way of living. And just about everything I had learned along that journey was relevant. It was not like a total do-over. Yeah.
Can you give an example maybe of one of those things, like where it applies a lot to your life now that maybe you wouldn't have thought it would?
Yeah. One of the examples is that when I was working in tobacco, and I know people will chuckle at this, but I was working on programs to stop kids from smoking. Mm-hmm. And at Exxon, we were doing work about malaria and AIDS in Africa. And one of the things that was at the core of both of those projects was an insistence on asking the question why and digging deeper and not accepting superficial answers. And so when I was in New Zealand and we were looking at youth smoking, what it came to was real issues in the Maori community, which is the indigenous community in New Zealand, issues with fathers not being fathers. Yeah. And so we started to partner and work at that level with fathers because there was a breakdown of community and kids were engaged in self-destructive behavior because they were in profound pain. And so you start to see that, and that habit of being curious, endlessly curious and passionately curious, and always looking for the deeper meaning and the deeper reason is something that helped me in my own life. And it's the very nature of the work we do here to try to get at the root causes of why do people struggle and what do they require to walk that road from struggle to strength and to achieve post-traumatic growth or to learn how to struggle well. So that, to me, is like a major one where my brain was shaped at never accept superficial answers. And that's what I needed when I was going through my own journey, because it would have been easy to move cities and be like, okay, well, I fixed it, right?
Yes.
But I took an Eat, Pray, Love trip around the world for 3 months. It was an amazing, amazing, amazing trip. I had the craziest and most beautiful experiences of my life. Yeah. And when I got home, everything I was running away from was waiting for me. Yep. It was literally waiting. And I couldn't look at pictures of my trip because it was that painful to me at that time. And so it's a reminder that like you can run, but you can't hide. Yeah. And that's not a bad thing.
I always say that. I feel like, especially when relationships end, that I always find that girlfriends and even guy friends of mine, like that's their immediate thing is like, maybe I'll just move to so-and-so, you know, maybe I should go and just go to this place. And I always say, I'm like, you can go, but you're still going to be dealing with the same things. And once you might go live in this country for a year, but then what's after that? Like everything's going to catch up at some point because you are still you, no matter where you are. And this is still all part of your story. And the more you try to run away from your story, the more shame you're going to feel, the more disconnected you're going to become to people in your life. Like you can't just run away from your story. It's going to be a part of you. And I think part of the work that you're doing and that you did of asking these questions of why are going to help you to actually own your story and be able to then better connect with other people.
And I totally agree. And then the main lesson I learned from all of that, from a life of money, power, respect, and all the rest of it, was that the answers aren't out there. And the answers are inside. And it often takes other people to help you ask the right question and to be able to dig deep and find the right answer. But that we have those answers within us. And so, yes, changing locations can help and create stimulus and catalysts and all the rest of it. Fine. But the truth is the answer is not out there. It's not in LA or Seattle or Vancouver or New Zealand. And I've been all over the place. It's inside of you. And what's striking is, and I'll come back to that story of the guys at the Hanoi Hilton who were in these prison cells, is they were forced to confront that because they were confined in these most absolutist terms. And what they teach us, to me, is really profound about what we can do in our own lives. And it's like when someone's like, everything was taken, including my name, the same with Viktor Frankl at the concentration camps. And what you realize is it actually focuses you and forces you to reckon with what the point of life is. And those folks are the ones who came back and have the answers that can help shape and guide the rest of us. And so we don't always have to look for, social support in the form of real people. We can also use books and people who've come before us. And that helped me the most, to be honest, was books, was Joseph Campbell, Viktor Frankl, the guys at the Hanoi Hilton. Because there's something true, and I say this to people and I kind of laugh, is, people who are dead can't really disappoint you. They don't have scandals. You don't find out stuff about them usually if they've been dead for 50 years. It's like they are who they are, or they are who they were. And so there's something peaceful about getting to read and connect with folks. And it also reminds us that we are not alone in this journey. I mean, life is a struggle. It is a series of ups and downs. It is challenging. And the fact that those things are true and that there's a way to navigate that with fulfillment and purpose and authenticity and joy and growth is our birthright, is the story of, like, every great story. It's every great movie. It's every great, the plot of everything is that story. It's that journey of overcoming and those tests. And it's every religious story, Buddha and Jesus and so forth. So.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think a large part of what, like, our initial conversation and even some of the conversation with Ken was just kind of about, like, normalizing people helping people. And I want to kind of, as we wrap up, I want to really kind of discuss this point because it really stuck out to me when you shared it with me, but was about democratizing mental health. I thought that was such a beautiful, like, phrase to use to describe it in terms of where we can go in order to help ourselves and to help other people. And I think it's so beautiful, like, your journey, and really appreciate you sharing it all. I didn't even know about the tobacco stuff, and I have so many questions about all your experiences, even with that. Like, I'm sure there's so many great stories and great things that, other people could learn from that would love to get into. But, just kind of this journey as it's taken you where you are now, where like you have this community, you have, you know, I'm assuming a better sense of like who you are through asking these series of questions of why.
And I mean, I feel like sometimes my life's like Benjamin Button, like in reverse, because I've traveled the world, I've had nice things, I've had lots and lots of money, and I'm like, okay, I'm done with all that. And people are like, oh, where do you want to travel to? And I'm like, kind of seeing everything. Like, I actually love waking up every day, and I mean every single day, and going to work and reading and studying and reflecting, and that's the joy that is my life now, and that life exists. And I think that the democratization of mental health is important, because what happens when people in our life struggle is we tend to push them towards experts. We tend to push them towards therapists. And that's not a knock on therapists. I appreciate what I know what you do, Taylor, and I think it's important. But there's only 450,000 psychologists, psychiatrists, and social workers in this country. And what's true is before that whole world existed, we took care of each other. And I think the call is, and this is what you do on this podcast and what you mentioned with your friend, is what we can do for each other is incredibly powerful. And we talked a little bit, there's an Indian psychiatrist named Vikram Patel who I was with recently. And Vikram's done amazing work in countries where they don't have they have 5,000 mental health professionals in India. And so what do? You get normal people and you bring mental health to the people where they are, wrapped in a form that they can connect with, which is as a regular person, no labels, no meds, just a conversation between people who are trained. But I think that's the most potent and important part, I think, of what my journey's been about, is the recognition that there are amazing clinicians in this country. There's no doubt about it. And there's some really bad ones too. And the most important thing we can do in life is realize that we are our brothers and sisters keepers, that we have an opportunity. And the best part is it is healing for us to transform our own pain and our own struggle and our own story in ways that benefit the lives of others, because it brings more meaning into the things we've been through. So if my time being suicidal has value for another human being, then that means that time isn't just a time in the darkness that was painful and sorrowful. It actually was a time that I experienced, so maybe somebody else didn't have to. And that's the beautiful virtuous circle about all of this, is that we can use our experiences and stories to help other people, and they can do the same. And it just creates this world where we help each other instead of shunting people aside and saying, oh, you should probably go talk to someone. It's like, why don't you be that person that they can talk to? And that's what my friend's brother-in-law was for me, because we weren't that close. But he was a person who, had training, but he was a friend who listened and who could talk to me at a time when that's what I needed. And I think that's the power of us as human beings, is that we all have that piece of ourselves that connects us to each other, which is that human condition, which is that aspect of struggle. And it's a beautiful part of life. And it's a wonderful opportunity that we can help each other through this crazy life that we all will encounter in one way or one form or another. So I'm grateful that I'm still here. I'm grateful for veterans who helped me realize that I wasn't at the end of the road, and that that there was still light in the darkness that I just couldn't see. And that's the amazing part, is I went from all of that to a life where I wake up and I'm grateful every day to be alive. I'm grateful for what I get to do, and I'm overflowing with gratitude and joy for the fact that I get to do what I get to do. So the journey is worth taking, because at the end of it is a life that you can be proud of, that you can look at and be like, yeah, now I can say, like, yeah, this is the life that I built, and that I want to live forever, as long as I can.
Yeah. That's so beautiful.
So yeah, it's amazing. It's been a heck of a journey.
Yeah. And I can't wait to see like all the other things that you're going to continue to do. I mean, you guys put out this book, Struggle Well, where like not only veterans can learn to kind of grow through their trauma in life, but like everyday people can as well. And really, really appreciate all the work that you guys are doing. And even just, I mean, I love that both you and Ken are so outspoken about this stuff, and that you guys are like men, I think we definitely need to see more of that, more of men feeling strong and feeling powerful by sharing their stories and sharing their emotions, and not associating it with being weak, and encouraging others to continue to do that. I think it's a really, really powerful thing. So I super appreciate you sharing today.
No, I appreciate that, Taylor. And I look around and we can get into statistics about, 25% increase in suicide rates since 1999 and on and on. But there is a heck of a lot of struggle in our country, much less the world. And it pains me. And I know that the veteran part of that is a very small number. And so my hope and our desire, and we created this institute for the purpose and wrote the book so that we could start to take on these challenges in the broader world, in part because we recognize that veterans and warriors who are looked upon as distinct and as strong. And if they're willing to confront their own challenges, then they provide the courage that they gave me to other people to say, hey, not only is this okay, but it's critical. Mm-hmm. This is a critical part of your journey. And if you need a guide to walk that road with you to make you feel safe as you take that road, we'll take somebody who runs to the sound of gunfire and who will make you feel that. And that's why I think they're such potent allies for civilians in this journey, is that they're not afraid of that darkness. And mm-hmm. they can teach us a lot. And to your point, they can teach men what it means to be a complete man. Mm-hmm. And that is a complete man, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, in every facet of our life. They've taught me, and I know that all because that's what they've taught me. Yeah. And I'm like I'm patient zero, I guess.
Yeah. Well, no, and I'm sure that just as much as of what you've learned from them, that they've also learned a tremendous amount from you. And I think that's like the beautiful thing about when we do open up to other people, that it's always a two-way street. Like there's always something to learn from every interaction that we have, and someone else's story can provide so much insight and is an opportunity to also then reflect on your own shit and stuff you've dealt with and how you've experienced it and how they've experienced it, and can just be such a bonding experience. And
that's sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, that's the core. So Rich Tedeschi, who's the founder of this post-traumatic growth, which is the kind of science that we work on the basis of, he's been doing this for 40 years, and he just retired as a professor at UNC Charlotte. He's still a clinical psychologist who sees patients. And Rich, even though he's been doing this for that long, 42 years as a professor, he will tell you that he is simply a representative and ambassador for those who struggle, and that they teach him every single day. And he reminds mm-hmm. me and all of us that you are never just a teacher. You are always a student. And that is a core part of my life. It's why I read as much as I do. I try to ingest as much information as possible, because I recognize that there will always be far more that I don't know than that I do, and that the people around us can enrich our lives in so many ways. And as you said, they can teach us so much about how to live well, how to struggle well, whether it's relationships or principles or whatever it might be. That's the beauty of life, is that we can all teach each other and support each other. And I think that what you just said is spot on. And it's how I define who I am, which is I'm a student. Mm-hmm. I'm a student of my life. I'm a student of life in general. And I'll always be that. And if I ever am not, then I've got enough people around me who will put me down to size and make sure that I stop talking and start listening again. Yeah,
they'll check you on it.
Yeah,
it's good to have those people.
They're bigger than me.
Yes. Well, thank you so much again. I've learned so much from our conversation, and I'm so glad that we got connected and that you were so open with sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
I'm grateful to be connected with you, Taylor, and thank you for what you do. It's really important.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode. And again, if you want to hear a little bit more of the backstory and some of the stuff we talked about, you can check out the episode 54 right before this with Ken, where we talk a little bit more about the programs that they're working on and how that's helping people to process trauma. But feel free to send us emails. You can hit us up at ask.letstalkaboutit@gmail.com. And also always love getting reviews from you guys and seeing what you guys are liking about the show on iTunes. So please take a chance and take a second and head on over there. And thank you again so much for all of your support and for listening. And I'll be back next time to talk to you about something new.
This podcast is brought to you by Wave Podcast Network. Check out all of our shows, including the Brain Candy Podcast, I Don't Get It, Babes and Babies, Coffee Convos, and Let's Talk About It.